We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 80 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Dan. Happy New Year to all our listeners.
How are things with you?
January is to be endured, not enjoyed. I noted some wit say on social media. That sounds slightly worse than it is, but I'll be happier when it's a little less wet.
Indeed, yes. It's as the Scots would say, it's been a bit dreek lately. So we're delighted to be joined today, returning to the podcast, libertarian Mal McDermott. Mal, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, and Happy New Year to you both as well.
Indeed. So, Mike, what we got to talk about today?
So, in the spirit of a new exciting year, we're talking about strikes. We're talking about the possible return of the mask, but also, as we are in the anniversary, we're talking about 50 years of Ireland being in the EU.
Indeed. So yes, it's January, and some of my Christmas cards have finally turned up. I know that I don't have that many friends, but I did think there were a few too few actually before the Yuletide celebrations. Yes, because the post people have been on strike, as we use the post less and less these days. It's interesting that those whose jobs really should be on the line seem to think that they have a right to more money, it seems. But the post people are not the only people who've been on strike lately. The trains have been on strike, or the train drivers, and at various different times, different types of train staff, which essentially meant that, certainly for me, and I think for most people in London who normally travel into central London for work, that they completely worked from home during that first official work week back after the Christmas celebrations. And Mike, we're talking later about something that happened in the 1970s. It looks like we've gone back to it.
It does, and to me, it feels like part of the general feeling of sort of beigeness of the country at the moment. Nothing quite works. You used the word, was it Drake earlier? It is like that. It's and you want to plan something, you think, oh, you might go somewhere, you look at a free weekend, and of course there's a train strike, so you can't get there. I got more of my Christmas cards after Christmas than before Christmas this year, which is quite weird. And obviously these people have a right to strike, but if I was a postie, I'd be wondering, apart from 1 week before Christmas of the year, who cares what they do? Sorry, I know not everyone will agree, but personally, that's what I find. And the ambulance strikes we've just had, obviously that's more worrying because that's much more of a risk to a service. But interestingly, it didn't. The NHS is interesting. Sorry, it's the wrong word. Terribly, the NHS is so bad. Who noticed?
Well, quite. I mean, it was interesting that in the run up to the ambulance strikes, I believe there was some government advice which was like, take care, try not to break any bones, that sort of thing. Try not to do anything that requires you to call an ambulance. And you don't always call an ambulance just because you're feeling poorly or something like that. Now, I'm not sure who these people are that do that, but apparently some do. Mal, what have you made of these recent strike actions?
Yeah, it's tough. It's there's there are some ones that I'm going to obviously approve and disapprove of. I think I'd be on Mike's side with kind of the postal workers, The rail strikes as well is, I mean, it came out yesterday. I was just reading that the average wage was 60K for the train drivers who are on strike, and they've rejected an offer, or are going to reject an offer that would have seen that increase by 5K per annum over 2 years. And yeah, at that stage, when the base salary that we're talking about is almost double the median wage of the UK, it's hard to have sympathy for that. And as the government is now proposing to move forward to automation of the train service, I don't think that anyone is really going to be up in arms against that, except for Mick Lynch. But there are some, I think the ambulance drivers, the nurses, I would say if carers went on strike, I would be fully in support of that. That's a tough job that doesn't get paid as well as it should. But yeah, it is tough in a way to kind of divide that kind of on who you're going to support, who you're not going to support. You really have to look at that deeply.
I mean, certainly you can understand people if they feel that whether that wage, that base wage, if you like, is right or not. With the significant level of inflation that has been caused to a great extent, certainly from my perspective, by the government printing money and stopping people from going about their business, you're going to see the sort of the cost of living crisis, or as it's described. But certainly, the cost of various goods and services has gone up a lot more than it has been doing in previous few decades, to be honest. So you can understand people wanting to see their wages keep up with that cost of living, absolutely. But as you say, Mal, some of these train drivers, and I mean, there's going to be a lack of sympathy. But you know what, as well, the thing which really gets to me about them, it isn't that they're stopping me necessarily going into work, because, I happen to be in a position whereby I can work from home. Many people are these days with the technological advances, which also means that there isn't less of a need for trains, but, never mind that. It's also the fact that the people who are actually suffering as a result of the train strikes and fewer people going into central London, it's the people who work in the bars and the shops and the small businesses that require there to be a certain number of people in and around central London for it to work for them, especially in the city of London. So there's no kind of solidarity there with people who are generally going to be actually low paid, because those people probably will just not bother opening up the pub or the restaurant or the convenience store necessarily. So it's a great shame, but hopefully something can get sorted out, or some common sense will prevail shortly.
Yes, I mean, I would agree with that. Now, I would say that our friend Mr. Lynch would have less sympathy for probably what he would describe as the petty bourgeois shop owners and pub owners. But really, he should be looking at the people who, again, as you say, have to go to work, say facility staff, security, cleaners, people like that, who have to show up to these offices every day and, would not be in the position to just work from home. And if they miss shifts, that they're not getting paid for that, they're not going to get compensated for that. And where is the working class solidarity?
Indeed.
Well, you're right. There's none of that. I suppose very hard to think how you break a train strike these days. The trains companies are massively subsidised by the taxpayers, and their services got worse after lockdown. I can't help but wonder if some of these, and this is something, the government has control over these industries now, that they could potentially do, is start offering them something they frankly might not even want, which is a bonus. And if you move their you can keep the same total salary cap, but move to a performance related scheme. it's amazing how a disincentive, i.e. you might lose some of your bonus if there's so many days lost to strikes, might change the future of these organizations. I've been self-employed. I'm sure you guys have worked in, and many of our listeners have worked in industries where a lot of your pay is fungible. It might not be a fixed amount, and that don't often make your work a bit harder.
I think there's no doubt that the current arrangements certainly with most, if not all, actually now of the franchisees have these train companies, that the arrangements between them and the government are not satisfactory whatsoever in terms of where the ticket revenue goes, whenever there are subsidies. What the whole arrangement is unsatisfactory. Now, of course, we know people who would suggest that the way out of that is to nationalise a whole rail network. They would be very happy to see that, and I suspect that would probably be somewhat popular policy in the country, whether it's right or wrong. But I suspect people would think, well, we've got to try something, and even if it's the thing we had a few decades ago, they might have forgotten just how bad British Rail was. But yeah, the current arrangements are not at all satisfactory, and we can almost only hope that something changes there. Some of these problems, I'm pretty convinced, have been brought about because of the lockdowns and obviously the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and the way that governments in this country and in many other countries reacted to that situation, both with stopping people from going about their business, but also by printing lots of money to take part in various furlough schemes, etc. And that was all because of the pandemic. Well, we can remember those days when we were allowed to go out and we were allowed to go to certain pubs for in certain groups, but we had to wear masks. Well, we thought we were through the pandemic. I certainly don't see that we should have to do anything more. But apparently, the good old RNHS has been asking us to start considering wearing masks, particularly the Scottish NHS. Mike, what have you made of things north of the border?
There's two things playing out in there, isn't there, in Scotland? One thing that's never playing out in Scotland is that Nicola Sturgeon wants to improve things for the people of Scotland. She wants to do her job and have a functioning government, because that would play against her obviously overriding narrative, which is for Scotland to break away from the United Kingdom. And there's nothing in theory wrong with that. But if you are in a role that is there to benefit, run services for, help set the foundations for a good economy, the people of Scotland, maybe you ought to try and do that just for once in a while. And I have a suspicion she's frankly almost excited at the chance if she can make their lives a little bit grayer, because her answer to everything is, if we were just free of England, it would all be okay. So I think there's that backdrop to it. There is also overlapped with that, and we see it with the health chiefs in the UK that are talking about bringing back, often have requirements for masks within medical places and what have you. There's a certain layer of people that are just really pleased to get back to masking up. It's an us and them. It's a showing they're a good people. It's they're doing their bit. And they frankly don't like people who are of independent thought. And so this is, any opportunity, they couldn't be happier. And I think it just unfortunately plays into that narrative.
Yeah, so we're now being told, stay at home if you've got a bit of a cold, and some people are saying that really, really we should wear masks on public transport. But really, it's to save our NHS, because it's a cold and flu season, and there's this big COVID backlog. Well, that'll happen if you turn your NHS into a COVID health service. So it's more government intervention. Mal, how do you feel about our NHS?
So, I mean, as a libertarian, I can't say I'm fully in support of the NHS. it is that thing that, I mean, once you open Pandora's box, you can't close it again. And we have done that with the masking up and with mask mandates. The government now, it was never a power that was given to a government that would give back in any way lightly. So yeah, this will be the new trend, and they will continue to try this. The hope is that maybe with still a conservative government, that this won't spread to England. I'm not surprised that Nicola Sturgeon is and the Scottish would be looking to do this. She does think that they're Scandinavian rather than part of the British Isles. So it just feeds into everything that they want to be. The less kind of that kind of contrarian, well, if the English aren't doing it, we'll show that we're doing it, and we can show the EU that we're willing to do this. We'll absolutely comply. We'll, at the drop of a hat, institute state controls on any part of life. Makes her look like more of a good EU candidate, I think.
Of course, I know she does have this idea of being a sort of Scandinavian style country, style economy, or what have you. But of course, Sweden didn't do very much of that sort of thing. So, but yes, I'm sure she wants to be there's a lot of virtue signaling anyway, certainly of various different types going on north of the border.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of a very tangible sign that you're complying or that you're virtue signaling almost. You don't even have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. You just wear this mask, and now you can be seen as good, kind of, and get a pat in the head from the Faucis and the whoever else of this world.
I remember saying at the time when the mask was sort of first in, and but we were open a bit. One of the things I found during the kind of struggles over whether we would leave the EU or not was that you'd go around, you'd meet people, you'd start chatting to people, and they'd be perfectly fine and normal. Then you find out they were the sort of person that believed in overthrowing democracy, because they'd suddenly turn around to you and say, well, we can't leave the EU. I don't care who voted for it, and anti-democratic nonsense like that. And I thought, at least with the mask situation, when the mask became sort of a bit more optional, you could see the people that were, frankly, not operating on your wavelength, who didn't go along with individual liberty. At least it was obvious who they were. At least they wore a symbol of their oppression. So maybe if that's one upside to people wearing masks again, we know who they are. I'm not sure it's a good thing, but it's the one bright thought I can take from it.
I think there's the flip side to that coin is then they can see you as well.
Yes.
The more liberty minded are then kind of very exposed, and literally almost it's like it's a great strategy, because you can cover the face of anyone who's in compliance, and they literally become like an NPC. And then anyone who's got individualism is literally, you can see the expression on their face. It's like the dream where the criminals are the ones not wearing masks.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Ready police state. It's an absolute blessing.
Yeah, so Mike, you mentioned just shortly a while ago the whole Brexit post-referendum, should we call them discussions? And of course, something that I just, for whatever reason, completely sort of missed my contemplation until the other day was that we've just passed the 50th anniversary of when the UK joined the European Union, or the Common Market, as it was, in fact, the European Economic Communities, as it was back on the 1st of January 1973. We have, of course, now left the European Union. Whether we're making the most of it's another matter. However, we officially have done so. But one of those countries that joined on the same day as us, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, Denmark being the other country that happened to join on the same day, has been celebrating its 50 years of membership. Interesting, because we sort of know a little bit about the discussions that went on prior to the UK joining the common market, and certainly know about the arguments that were put forward after that point and ahead of the 1975 referendum, and of course everything that's happened since then. But it'd be interesting to see what had occurred in the Republic of Ireland up to the point that they joined on the same day as we did back in the early 70s. Mal, is much of this discussed at all, or much of this history sort of taught in the Republic of Ireland?
I can't speak for now, but I know in my time at school, it wasn't really. But then, I mean, that would have been, I left in 2005. So the more serious side of it and the kind of discussions around Brexit or Ireland leaving, or kind of when the Troika came in, any of those maybe harsher things. Up until that point, it was just something in the background that was seen as a big benefit to the country because so much money flowed in from the EU. But no, I was actually interested when I was researching for this episode that how many times we had been applied and rejected. It was similar to the Republic trying to get into the UN as well, which was vetoed by Stalin, I think, initially.
He did something sensible then.
Yeah. Well, his theory or his thought process was because Ireland had remained neutral in World War II, that the rebuilding of the new world should be left to those who fought for it. Now, it also helped that a lot of those neutral countries turned out to be American allies that he didn't want in the UN.
Yeah.
But similarly, yeah, kind of all through the 60s, there was two major applications. The first one wasn't even looked at, and the second one was rejected on the grounds of economic underdevelopment, which I kind of in the back of my mind brought the old phrase, like, if you want to apply for a mortgage, you first have to prove you don't need one.
Yes.
So it was kind of like, you have to get yourself up to a level of economic stability, and then we'll let you in our economic union. And that, I mean, it's interesting then, kind of Ireland was posting GDP growth figures up until that point, and then probably because of the big downturn in the world economy, but then it goes negative until the late 80s and early 90s when the Celtic Tiger picked up. And how much of that can be attributed to the EU then is really up for debate in my eyes. But yeah, billions have poured in from the EU, but then that does make us quite dependent as well on that EU money. And it's also, as I was talking about, kind of contrarianism in Scotland as well. It's very, I mean, I see it as very ironic that there are lots of people with strongly held Republican beliefs that will be very pro-EU. And for me, it just feels like you've got your sovereignty for about the Republic was only actually declared in 1948, I believe. So we only had been an actual republic kind of transitioning from the Free State era since 1922. So, I mean, that was around for about 13 years, 23 years. And then you joined another union. Now, I know at the time it was the EEC and it was seen as just an economic thing, but the groundwork for what is now the EU and the political union was already there and was established in the Treaty of Rome, that would be progressing. So it was already on the cards. And of course, the great irony now that the EU is championed by the left. Of course, the only two parties in Ireland to oppose the joining of the EU were Sinn Féin and Labour, the leftist parties, who are now the biggest proponents of the EU.
Yeah, so I was looking into this as well, and it was interesting to see the sort of debates such as they were back in the kind of 50s and 60s, when you say, which was at the time when the UK originally looked to join, and Charles de Gaulle said no on 2 occasions. Because, of course, as you say, there was a sort of issue there that, battled for independence, as it were, at times literally, for so long, only to then cede quite a lot of sovereignty to a supranational body. Now, just sort of looking through it, it seems as if certainly the sort of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil had perhaps realised that this idea of being a kind of self-sufficient country really wasn't working out economically at all. But so they wanted to be part of something bigger, but obviously that bigger thing wasn't going to be what they had, as you say, not that long ago kind of left, United Kingdom or the British Empire, although I suppose by that point the British Empire wasn't really around really. So they thought, well, the European community will do for us, thank you very much. But of course they wouldn't join unless the UK did, because at the time the economy was so reliant upon agricultural exports to the UK that if the UK didn't join, but the Republic of Ireland did, then it certainly in a short-term basis, it would have been very difficult economically for Ireland. But because we did at the same time, those sort of issues didn't eventuate at that time. Also, as you say, the Republic of Ireland was a net beneficiary for many, many years of regional growth funds and all kinds of things. And of course, the Common Agricultural Policy was certainly good for, well, on the face of it, was good for Irish farmers for many years. And of course, Ireland was a very agricultural based economy back in those days. It's obviously, changed for a bit really since then. And of course, there's the infamous low corporation tax. So you there's getting money from the EU, so they could subsidise the everything, have a low corporation tax, and all of these companies would move certainly their European head offices to Ireland, and pay a lower corporation tax. So certainly it was an interesting way to go about things. Mike, what have you found when you've been looking into this?
Well, the things that possibly more a couple of questions really for Mal, just the grants and infrastructure funding. I sort of remember hearing in the 90s just how popular the EU was in Ireland as a result of that, and that transitioned into the euro. So I just wonder, obviously you were there then, and I can't remember it. What was your impression back then of how popular the EU was, and how popular the introduction of the euro was?
I would say they were both seen as very popular at the time, because when I was around in the 90s, because it was seen as kind of this money that's flowing in, you're a net beneficiary, you have a huge market to export to. It didn't seem as anything that was ever going to be negative, and there were kind of no downsides to it at that time. So yeah, it was just seen as this generally positive thing. And I mean, the euro went through with little or no opposition, as far as I can remember, but it just kind of sailed through. And again, kind of with every referendum that was EU linked, that these would go through. And if they didn't go through, they just hold a second referendum.
Yes,
which is always the way it's done in Ireland. I remember my friend, who's a historian, reminding me that actually the very first referendum on the Anglo-Irish Treaty had to be held twice because it was rejected the first time. So that was back in the 20s. So it set the stage for Irish referendums. Kind of, if the government wants something, it'll just kind of say, no, you didn't do that right the first time. Come on now,
Yeah.
do what we want. So yeah, it was, again, it wasn't seen as anything negative, especially with the euro. There was no sense. It was like kind of, oh, well, we're not doing anything with our monetary policy anyway. Let's just give it to Brussels. And I mean, for me, kind of then what later transpired with the Troika, I mean, if you've given up your your fiscal and your monetary policy, are you really in charge? If you can't decide how much money is going to be in the economy and how that money will be spent by the government, what kind of use are you? And that's kind of remained. And I saw that was another thing when I was researching, that was why the original Lisbon Treaty, I believe, was rejected, because there was going to be implications that the EU could start kind of changing the tax rates and kind of working with the fiscal policy, and that the concessions from the EU were that definitely wouldn't happen. But then obviously 3 to 4 years later, it absolutely did happen. And the corporation tax, I believe, is probably will, I would imagine, that will be harmonized or raised in the next 5 to 10 years.
And just sort of, and you're right, and you touched upon it there, and I think we would probably all agree on this pod that the EU is really just the predecessor to the United States of Europe, and they might never call it that, but at some point it will be obvious that it's a country, not an international body as such. I think the EU referendum here came down to that question of are you British or are you European, and obviously from the Remain side it was really an economics argument, but we got enough people to say, look, no, actually being British is much more important. What do you think that willingness is like in Ireland to ultimately be a member of a country called Europe rather than be a separate state of Ireland?
I would say there's very high willingness. I don't think that there would be much opposition to it. I think the sense of Irishness is in rapid depletion. I think if you were to ask the common person on the street what it means to be Irish, do they speak any Irish? Things like that. I mean, it wasn't long ago that Irish was removed from the core curriculum, so you don't have to take Irish as a subject in secondary school anymore. So these things slowly Europeanizing the country, and with very little opposition. Again, and since Brexit as well, Brexit has been a blessing for the EU in this respect, in terms of Ireland, that it has solidified kind of in Irish people's minds their commitment to being in the EU, in that contrarian kind of, as just if Britain's doing it, then we'll go the opposite way, regardless of how good or bad that decision is. And yeah, it's I really couldn't see any opposition to it. There are people who kind of secondly call themselves Europeans now, or feel a sense of European identity. As to what that means, I don't know if someone from Norway and someone from the south of Italy are living the same life, but I mean, it's interesting as kind of America looks more and more like some states might actually secede or attempt to secede. I know that kind of movement is picking up traction in the bigger states, like in Texas, that Europe is kind of on the opposite track of kind of joining more and more together. And yeah, I just think that idea of wouldn't be in any way opposed in Ireland from what I've seen and from what I've heard from people.
And I was going to ask you at some point in this was what do you think the chances of British exit, like the British exit? And I guess that's very little.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when I ran I ran a page on Facebook, kind of a libertarian, Irish libertarian page, and I mean, w- just the complete lack of willingness to even discuss the Irexit. It's a hard word to pronounce, that Irish
Yes.
exit. But yeah, it's just it's non-existent, the debate for it. I mean, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil would be totally in favor of the EU. Um, People just see it as the a kind of what's always been. It's always been beneficial to us. Um, they've seen every bailout, every kind of increased control that's come from the EU as a positive. So it would take something catastrophic, something, but then the only thing I could think of would be threats to neutrality, which has always been a point of pride for the Republic. But again, the EU has it's for me, it's quite like the civil service. It's such a big organization that's been around for long. It plays very long games, and it doesn't mind sitting back and waiting for that. And it will do death by a thousand cuts. It will just slowly chip away and chip away and chip away until all of a sudden you've got this, united European army. And yeah, that just wouldn't surprise me at all, because again, with that dependency on all of those subsidies, and because those subsidies are, like most government subsidies, malinvested, that they just fly out of the economy, or they just end up kind of being bought with consumer goods, or kind of there's very little capital investment with them, and the capital investment that does happen tends to be malinvested or need constant topping up from the state or from the EU, which isn't an industry that should be in existence. If it can't survive in the free market, then there's not enough actual demand for that business. However, it's hard to argue with people, because that's their livelihoods and that's their jobs, and so they're going to continue to vote for that.
So, Mark, do you think, well, when obviously Ireland had its crisis, as it were, its financial crisis, it's going back some time now, but when it didn't, it was bailed out somewhat by the EU. Do you think the people there felt it was the fault of the politicians or some of the business leaders in Ireland, and that the EU was the savior, rather than some of the issues being caused by being a member of the euro?
I think those were successfully whitewashed. I don't know who does the PR for the EU, but they should be getting paid a lot of money. It's just fantastic. I mean, how they've been able to whitewash it. I mean, if you ask any Irish person, causes of financial crash or anything like that, the first word will be greedy bankers, obviously, and then it will be probably very specific politicians. They would say, kind of, it will be Fianna Fáil politicians that caused this crash. Now, the fact that every Tom, Dick, and Harry was out there taking a very low interest rate mortgage that they probably in the back of their mind knew they could never pay back, never factors into it. Because if you can blame a kind of faceless organization or a group of people, that's better than taking individual responsibility, and it's why no lessons have ever been learned from the crash. But yeah, it would never be blamed on the EU. That is the absolute level of trust and kind of affection, let's say, Irish people have for the EU.
Well, there you go. 50 years of Ireland in the EU. Will it be another 50 years? Will it still be around in 50 years? Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, I mean, my hope is every day I like Googling just to see how Italy is doing, because that hopefully would be a big player out, kind of, and to lose Britain and Italy in the space of 10 years or so would be a real blow to the EU. That would be my hope. Now, the fact that Greece never left is troubling. But then, I mean, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, those smaller countries, really, they're going to start kind of feeling the push. But then, is the EU going to start feeling the push now that the kind of ex-Soviet bloc countries are picking up as well? That Polish influence that the kind of liberals in Germany and France just absolutely despise, that kind of based Polish kind of right-wing mentality that's coming in. And I mean, Poland's a huge economy, it's big population, same size as Spain. You know, what's that influence going to be like? And those other countries then, like Slovakia, places like that, these kind of very Christian conservative countries, what's that going to be? What's the impact of that going to be like on the EU? And will they decide they're going to leave? But I don't believe that the EU is going to let that, because that could push them into the hands of the Russians again. So they might have to give concessions there. So the EU as an organization is going to have to change as well with those new challenges that are coming to it. So, but again, I just, it's that thing that kind of Ireland has joined this organization in order to have more influence, but has just any influence has been totally diluted in terms of us on the world stage.
Interesting. Just you mentioned the Eastern Europeans there. There's lots of confident, dynamic countries there that really have a belief in themselves. Perhaps a newfound belief, having their economies now picked up after the years of communism and what have you. And it strikes me the EU relies on countries not having a belief in themselves. You know, France and Germany got together because they had spent 2 world wars, you know, trying to destroy each other. Britain and Ireland joined at a time where our economies were crashing and our countries, you know, we were the sick man of Europe at one point, and, you know, it was managed decline, and, you know, with the kind of catchphrases, lots of the Mediterranean thought they could kind of catch up because they couldn't do it on their own. But now you've got countries that are actually saying, no, we're doing well. Things are getting better. I'm not sure the EU can cope with that future.
No, I'd agree there that it does require the EU requires you to need it. Like when I was in Slovakia last year, I was just amazed by, you know, for a country that's relatively the same size of Ireland, just the amount of just little factories producing things like white goods. It's just something you just don't see in somewhere like Ireland, where it's either tech jobs or farming kind of. Now we do have our pharmaceuticals industry, which is quite big as well. But again, those actually like making something like cars or fridges, that's alien to us. So it was interesting to see how a small country could be so robust in that way as to be able to produce these things and kind of confidently, as you say, produce them. And so, yeah, that is always going to be a threat to any organization. Say, like I was talking about before, the federal government in the States, you've got somewhere like Texas. They don't need it. Like I was listening to someone who lived in Texas there, like kind of angrily complaining that they're paying 30% corporation tax. They pay 0 income tax, but they have to pay the corporation tax because that's federal. So it doesn't need to be there, so they don't want it. But obviously then there's always going to be that kind of majority of people who are benefiting from these subsidies. Now I'm always, it's that thing that they don't realize where these subsidies are coming from or the liberties that they're giving up to gain these subsidies. I mean, the bond issuance in there from during the pandemic, which is the new way that the EU does quantitative easing, is to buy bonds from the various central banks. Now, the thing is that I was actually reading a Financial Times article there not long ago, but they've changed how the collective action clauses work. So every bond that's issued in the EU comes with something called a collective action clause, which means if you're unable to repay the bond, if I think it's 65% of the bondholders vote in favor of it, they can basically come in like the Troika did and restructure the economy to make you pay back that bond. And what's troubling is that it was assumed at this stage that the EU would be holding these bonds, but in March of this year, the EU is looking to offload a huge amount of bonds from its balance sheet. And it'll be interesting to see who picks those up and who buys them, because now you've got a kind of a third player that will be picking up this collective action clause as well. So that could be troubling. And to my mind, there's only one country that's going to have the money and the willingness to do that, and that's going to be China.
Mm.
So from the amount of personal sovereignty we've given up, because our laws are no longer decided in Dublin, they're decided in Brussels, and the amount of economic liberty we've given up in terms of bond issuances and giving up our monetary policy, and now to a certain extent giving up our ability to decide our tax rate and our fiscal policy. So what are we then but just a client state of Germany, basically?
Well, fingers crossed that people begin to see the light, and we'll watch this space. As you say, there's some developments in Eastern Europe, and perhaps that will inspire some people in Ireland and other places too.
Yeah, hopefully. Like, I mean, you have to be optimistic or you go mad, kind of. So I just try and speak my mind, tell the truth, and really just hope that kind of people can come to that, a realization that this isn't an absolutely good organization, and to realize how many of the laws that are enacted come from bureaucrats and not from elected politicians within the EU. I think that's the other thing, that the EU is it's so distant that you assume that it operates like any other government, when really it doesn't. There are so many unelected bureaucrats who have the ability to pass laws and decide on policy of the EU, that it's really kind of more of a corporation at times than a government.
Well, they said to us that we couldn't persuade people to vote for parties or to get a referendum or what have you to get us out, and it took a long time to get there, but we just about managed to do it. So there's always hope.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just have to remain hopeful. Yeah.
So, Mike, what have we got on our website?
Yeah, a couple of new articles on our website. From Local Debating Society, Maureen Levy given a speech on the topic of business and service providers are using technology to thwart, contact and impose control on our lives. And it's particularly that last bit that was the theme of her speech. We've got that up on the website, really interesting. I think it probably summarizes many of the things that people are feeling. I'll just give a quick quote from it. I'm sure many of you remember when people could, to a great extent, make their own individual decisions on the direction of their lives and what to say and think and whom they deal with. And yes, I think some of us do remember that and wish we could go back to it. We've also got some plans for 2023. We went out and spoke to lots of people about what their plans for 2023. We've got a few pages up of responses from different organisations. I'll just give you one from Hilary Judge, the Together Croydon organisation. She said, I hope they take the Cash Fridays campaign on board and it goes nationwide. Businesses should be encouraged to actively promote taking cash. And if you're not aware of it, Cash Fridays is a campaign to encourage people to spend cash on a Friday so that they can ensure cash stays in circulation.
Well, if you'd like to write for our website or have any stories you would like us to cover, please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter @CroydonConst, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalist@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the podcast and the YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It's always good to get feedback and it helps others to find the podcast. Well, thank you very much, Mal, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And thank you to everybody for listening. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Happy New Year.